There's a thing nobody tells you about standing guard. You stop seeing faces. 1,000 people walk past you in a day. Tourists mostly. Phones up, mouths open, laughing at you, daring each other to make you flinch. After a while they all blur into one big moving wall of color and you learn to look through them, not at them. You watch the wall, not the people in it. That's why I still don't understand how Bram saw her. I've gone over it 100 times since. There was nothing about that woman that should have caught anyone's eye. She wasn't loud. She wasn't close. She was just a gray hood at the back of the crowd, by the iron fence, on a wet Tuesday in October. And Bram saw her like she was the only living thing on the whole square. I'll tell it the way it happened. I was there for most of it. The parts I wasn't there for, I got later from Bram himself when he finally talked, and Bram talking was rarer than snow in summer. My name's Tomas. Back then I was 23 and green as the grass on the palace lawn. I'd been posted to Greymont Palace in the city of Velden, capital of Veldoria, for all of 4 months. 4 months. I thought I knew the job. I knew nothing. Bram Halloran had been doing it for 19 years. You have to understand what kind of man Bram was, or none of the rest makes sense. He was the stillest person I have ever met. Not cold, still. There's a difference. Some of the older guards went stiff and mean from too many years on the line. Bram just went quiet all the way down. When he stood his post, you got the feeling the whole world could fall over and he'd be the last thing left standing, holding his place, waiting for orders that weren't coming. The young ones were a little scared of him. I was at first. He didn't waste words. If you got it wrong, he'd say, again, and that was the whole lesson. If you got it right, he said nothing at all, which somehow felt better than any praise. So that Tuesday. It was the dead end of October, and the sky over Velden had that low gray ceiling that the city gets in autumn, like a lid pressed down on a pot. Drizzle that couldn't make up its mind to be rain. The kind of damp that gets into the seams of your uniform and sits there. The crowd was thin for a weekday. School groups in matching caps, a handful of older couples with umbrellas, a man trying to film himself talking to the camera while his wife held a sandwich. The usual. Bram and I were on the forecourt post, the one closest to the main gate where the black and gold iron meets the stone. You stand a set distance apart. You face out. You don't talk. The deal is you don't talk. So when Bram talked, I nearly jumped out of my boots. Back fence, he said, barely moved his lips. Gray hood, don't look yet. I waited the proper count the way you do, then let my eyes slide that way like I was just scanning. And there she was. A woman, I thought, though it was hard to tell, slight. A gray hood pulled up, standing right at the fence, not moving, hands in her pockets, not filming, not laughing, not doing anything a tourist does. Just looking in. Probably nothing, I said, because she looked like nothing to me. Bram didn't answer. He'd already gone still again. But it was a different kind of still now. Before, he'd been a statue. Now he was a hawk on a branch. She stayed maybe 10 minutes. She never raised a phone. She never spoke to anyone. A couple of times I caught her tilting her head like she was reading the windows of the palace, counting them, working something out. Then the school group surged in front of her, all caps and noise, and when they cleared she was gone. See that, Bram said. See what? She left. She wasn't looking at the palace, he said. She was looking at the third window, east wing, second floor. I didn't know what was behind the third window of the east wing. I told him so. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Her Majesty's morning room. And he didn't say anything else for the rest of the shift. Now I want to be fair here because later on people made Bram out to be some kind of mind reader and he wasn't. He'd just been watching that square for 19 years. He knew its rhythm the way you know the sound of your own house at night. When something didn't fit the rhythm, he felt it before he could even say why. That's not magic. That's just time. That's just paying attention when everybody else has stopped. I figured that'd be the end of it. One odd woman on one gray day. She came back the next morning. Same hood, same fence, same window. I clocked her this time without being told, and I felt a small, stupid flush of pride about it, which Bram instantly ruined by saying, "She moved. 3 meters left. Bet her sightline to the kitchen door." I hadn't noticed the 3 meters. Of course I hadn't. "What does she want?" I said. "Don't know yet." A pause. "She's not here for us." That's the thing that stuck with me. She's not here for us. Most people who linger at a palace fence, you can sort them in a second. Tourists want the photo. The angry ones want a confrontation. The lonely ones want to be near something grand. But this woman didn't want any of that. She didn't want the building. She wanted something inside it, and she was working out how to get to it, and she had the patience of someone who'd been working it out for a long time. By the third day, I'll be honest, I'd half talked myself into thinking it was harmless. People are strange. People have habits. Maybe she just liked the view. Bram didn't talk himself into anything. On the third day, at the end of our shift, he did something I'd never seen him do. When we came off the line and the relief took our places, Bram didn't go straight in. He peeled off toward the side gate, the staff one, and I followed because I didn't know what else to do. The hooded woman was crossing the far end of the square, heading for the park. And Bram followed her. Out of uniform, he was just a big tired man in a coat, and he kept a good distance, and he moved through the crowd like he'd done it before, which I suppose, in some old life he had. I trailed behind him feeling like a fool, my heart going faster than the situation deserved. She walked the length of the park and stopped at the Veldon Memorial Gardens, the long sunken garden at the south end, with the old stone wall and the bronze names set into it. The war dead, the lost at sea, the public servants, all the names the city keeps. She went to the wall. She put her hand on one of the bronze plates, and she stood there with her hand on it in the drizzle for a long, long time. Bram stopped dead. I came up beside him. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His face had gone a way I'd never seen it go. Not still, not hawk, something else. Like a man who's heard a song he hasn't heard in years and can't place where, but his whole body remembers it anyway. The woman turned to leave. We stepped back behind a hedge like a pair of amateurs. As she passed, the hood shifted, just for a second, just enough, and I saw a slice of her face. Young, mid-20s maybe, tired around the eyes in a way that doesn't come from one bad night. A face that had been crying and had decided to stop because crying wasn't getting it anywhere. She went, we let her go. Bram walked to the wall. He found the plate she'd touched. He stood in front of it the same way she had, and I watched his shoulders, which had carried 19 years of standing perfectly straight, slowly come down. "Bram," I said, "what's the name?" For a while, I thought he wouldn't tell me. Then he said very quietly, "Edrin Vale." I didn't know the name. Why would I? I was a kid. It was just a name on a wall to me, one of hundreds. "Who's Edrin Vale?" Bram put 2 fingers against the cold bronze, the way you'd touch a sleeping person to check they were still breathing. "He was the best of us," Bram said, "and we told everyone it was an accident." I need to back up here because that sentence, "we told everyone it was an accident," that's the whole story, really. Everything after is just the truth clawing its way back up to the surface after it had been held down for years. But I didn't get any of it that night. Bram closed up tight as a drum the second the words were out of his mouth, like he was surprised to hear his own voice say them. He walked me back to the barracks in silence. At the door he stopped and looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked old. "You didn't follow me today," he said. "Understand?" "I didn't follow you today," I said. "Good lad." And he went in. I lay awake half the night turning the name over. Edrin Vale, the best of us. An accident that wasn't. A young woman in a gray hood touching his name on a wall, then watching the Queen's window from the fence. I'm not a clever man, but even I could feel the shape of something big moving under all of it, the way you feel a wave coming before you see it. I didn't sleep much. I had the early post. The next morning the city was different. You could feel it before you knew why. There were more police on the square than usual, vans at the corners, a couple of men in plain suits with the particular flat stares that mean they're listening to a voice in their ear and not to you. Word in the guardroom was that there'd been a threat. Nobody knew exactly what. Something had come in, something credible enough that the captains were tight-jawed and the briefing ran long. Heightened posture, the duty captain said, which is the kind of phrase that means be afraid but keep your face still. Eyes open. Anything off the pattern, you call it. You don't decide it's nothing. You call it. Anything off the pattern. I thought of the gray hood. I almost said something. I should have said something. But Bram was standing 2 men down the line, eyes front, jaw like a closed door, and I'd promised him I hadn't followed him, and somewhere in my green little head I'd tangled the 2 things up together. So I kept my mouth shut. I've had to live with that, the keeping my mouth shut. We went out onto the forecourt. The drizzle had stopped, but the gray was still there, heavier if anything. The crowd was thin and jumpy. They could feel it too, the way crowds can, that sense that the air's been wound a notch too tight. I found her in the crowd within 5 minutes. Same fence, same hood, but she was different today. Before she'd been patient, settled, a woman with all the time in the world. Today she was moving, shifting her weight, looking left, looking right, looking back over her shoulder. Her hands wouldn't stay in her pockets. She kept touching the strap of a small canvas bag across her chest. And she wasn't alone in being jumpy. There was a man. I want to be careful describing him, because for years afterward I'd play him back in my head and add things that maybe weren't there. But this much I'm sure of. He was at the east corner near the kitchen gate, and he had a coat too heavy for the weather, and he was watching the hooded woman the way Bram had watched her. Except where Bram watched like a guard, this man watched like a hunter who's decided his quarry is finally in the open. I felt my mouth go dry. Bram, I said low, gray hood's back east side, and there's a man. I see him, Bram said. Of course he did. He'd probably seen him before I'd finished my coffee. What do we do? Nothing, Bram said. Yet we hold the post, we watch. We don't make it move before we understand it. That's discipline, see. Every part of me wanted to charge across that forecourt. Bram knew that the wrong move at the wrong second can turn a scare into a disaster. So we stood. We held. We watched 2 strangers circle each other across a crowd of schoolchildren, and we waited to understand it, and the seconds stretched out long and thin like wire about to snap. The hooded woman started moving along the fence, toward the side gate, toward, I realized with a cold drop in my gut, the spot where Bram and I had slipped out the day before. She knew that gate. She'd watched it. She was making for it. And the man in the heavy coat peeled off the wall and started after her. Bram broke his stance. I'd never seen it. 19 years and the man could stand through anything, and now, just like that, he came off his mark. Not a charge. A walk. A long, fast, deliberate walk, cutting an angle across the forecourt that would bring him between the woman and the man without either of them clocking it until it was too late. Tomas, he said, not looking back. Stay on the post. If it goes bad, you call it in. You don't follow me, you call it in. Bram. You call it in, he said. And he went. I watched him close the distance. I watched the hooded woman reach the corner of the side gate and stop, because something, a sound, a feeling made her turn. I watched the man in the heavy coat's hand go inside his collar to the bag at his shoulder. I watched Bram raise one open hand, palm out, the way you'd calm a frightened animal, his mouth already moving, already talking the woman down, already stepping his body into the line between her and the thing coming for her. I had my hand on the radio. I had the call half formed in my throat. And the world came apart. I don't remember the sound. People always ask about the sound, and I can't give it to them, because I don't think my ears took it in as sound. It was more like the air itself got shoved. Like a giant hand pushed the whole square 3 feet to the left and let it snap back. It came from the south, From the park, from the memorial gardens. The pressure of it hit me in the chest and sat me down on the stone. For a second there was no noise at all, just a high thin whine and the strange slow sight of the crowd folding down to the ground in a wave, everyone dropping at once, hands over heads, 1,000 mouths open in screams I couldn't hear yet. Then the sound came back all at once, and it was screaming, and car alarms, and a deep rolling rumble from the south where a column of pale dust and dark smoke was climbing up into the gray sky over the trees. The gardens, the wall of names, the bronze plate Bram had touched. I got to my knees. My ears were full of cotton and far-off bells. Everything I'd been trained for, every drill, every shouted instruction, it all came up through the panic the way a bone comes up through your skin, not pretty, but there. Call it in. I got my hand to the radio. I don't know what I said. Later they told me it was clear enough. Later they told me I held it together. I don't remember holding anything together. I remember the smoke and the screaming and looking for Bram in the chaos and not finding him. The forecourt was a stampede. The crowd had turned into a single panicked animal, all of it trying to run in every direction at once, parents grabbing children, an old man down on the stones and people stumbling over him. The threat we'd been briefed about, the heightened posture, all of it had been about the wrong place. They'd watched the palace. The bomb was in the park. It was in the gardens, among the dead, among the names. And I understood in a sick lurch what I'd missed. The man in the heavy coat, the hooded woman making for the gate, Bram going between them. I found him. He was up. He was on his feet near the side gate, and he had the hooded woman by the arm, and he was pulling her down and around behind the stone of the gatehouse, shielding her body with his own, his back to the smoke, his eyes scanning, his free hand already coming up, because the man in the heavy coat was still there. The man in the heavy coat hadn't run with the crowd. The man in the heavy coat was standing perfectly still in the middle of the screaming square, looking at the smoke in the south with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. He was smiling. The bomb in the gardens hadn't been the plan finishing. It had been the plan starting. Here's a thing about smoke. It changes the way light works. The whole square had gone the color of old photographs. The sun, what little there was of it behind the gray, came through the dust in long slanted bars, and people moved through those bars like ghosts, half there, half gone. The smell hit a second later, bitter, chemical, with something underneath it I didn't have a name for yet and didn't want one. I was on my feet. I don't remember standing. Across the square, the man in the heavy coat was smiling at the smoke, and Bram had the hooded woman pinned behind the gatehouse stone. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, 1,000 people were running, and my whole body wanted to run with them. That's the truth. That's the animal part. It doesn't care about your training. It just wants to be anywhere that isn't here. But Bram wasn't running. Bram was looking right at me across the chaos, and he lifted his chin, just an inch, just enough toward the man in the coat. Watch him. So I watched him. The man stopped smiling. He'd had his moment, whatever it was, and now he was moving again, and he was moving toward Bram, toward the woman. Through a crowd that was tearing itself apart, this one man walked calm and straight, like a stone in a river, and the water broke around him. His hand was inside his coat. I shouted, I don't know what, it didn't matter. Nobody could hear anything. And then the strangest thing happened, strange because it was so small, in the middle of something so huge. The hooded woman, the one Bram was shielding, the one everyone had been so afraid of, she looked up, saw the man coming, and her face didn't fill with fear. It filled with recognition. She knew him. She grabbed Bram's sleeve and she said something into his ear, fast, urgent, and whatever it was changed everything. Bram's head came up. He looked at the man in the coat with new eyes, not a guard sizing a threat, something colder. Something that went back further than that morning. The man got within 10 feet. He drew his hand from his coat. There was no gun. I'd braced for a gun. There was a phone, just a phone, held up in his fist like a torch, and his thumb was on the screen, and he was looking at Bram and the woman with an expression that said, plain as words, "I have one more. One more somewhere, waiting on a thumb." Everything stopped. You hear people say that and you think it's just a way of talking. It isn't. For one held breath, the whole roaring square narrowed down to 3 people and a phone, and the smoke drifting, and the screaming gone strangely far away, and the man's thumb hovering over the glass. "Don't," Bram said. I couldn't hear it. I read it off his mouth. One word, don't. Quiet, almost gentle. The same voice he used on me when I got it wrong. Again. No drama in it. Just a man who had decided in his bones that this was not going to happen and was informing the other man of that fact. The man in the coat said something back, sneered it, his thumb pressed down toward the screen. And Bram moved. I've replayed it 10,000 times and I still can't slow it down. 1 second he was crouched behind the stone with the woman. The next he had crossed the gap, and his hand was around the man's wrist, the phone hand, driving it up and away. And the two of them went down together onto the wet stones in a tangle, and the phone skittered loose and spun across the forecourt, and I was already running, finally running, toward them instead of away. I wasn't the only one. 2 police came in from the south corner. A guard named Otho from the inner post came pounding across the lawn, but Bram had him. Bram had him pinned and folded with a knee in his back and that wrist still locked up high, and the man was thrashing and shouting, and Bram wasn't even breathing hard. He was just holding, the way he held everything, like the world could fall over and he'd be the last thing standing. "The phone," Bram said, and this time I heard him because the ringing in my ears had ebbed enough. "Tomas, the phone, don't touch the screen. Nobody touch the screen." I got to the phone. It lay face up on the stones, cracked across one corner, the screen still lit. There was a number on it, half-typed, and a word, and a green button waiting to be pressed. I didn't understand what I was looking at, not then. I just knew Bram had said don't touch it, so I crouched over it and put my body between it and the world, and I shouted for the police, and I waited, my hands shaking so hard I had to lock them together to keep them still. The man under Bram's knee had stopped fighting. He'd gone limp and he was laughing. A horrible, soft, satisfied laugh, like none of it had gone wrong, like all of it had gone exactly the way he wanted. "Too late," he was saying. "You're too late. You were always too late." Bram leaned down close to his ear. "Niamh Vale," Bram said. And the laughing stopped. They took the square apart for 3 days. Bomb teams, dogs, men in heavy suits walking the gardens inch by inch. The thing in the gardens had been smaller than it sounded. That's what they told us anyway. A smaller device, poorly placed, which is a cold way to talk about something that had put 11 people in the hospital and the whole city into nightmares. 2 of those 11 were children from a school group. They both lived. I have thanked whatever's up there for that more times than I can count. The phone, the one I'd hunched over like a hen on an egg, was the thing that mattered. There'd been a second device. A real one. Bigger. The half-typed message on that screen was a trigger, waiting to be sent, and the place it would have sent it to was the staff wing of Greymont Palace itself. The kitchens. The corridors where 40 people worked every morning making the place run. The man in the heavy coat had set off the small one in the gardens on purpose. To make the panic. To make everyone run out of the palace and into the square, into the open, where the second one, sent by a thumb on a phone, would have done the real work. Bram's hand on that wrist was the only reason the thumb never came down. 11 people in the hospital, it could have been 100, it could have been 200. People said that to him afterward, the captains, the ministers, the ones who came to shake his hand. You saved 100 lives, 200. And Bram would nod and say, "We did the job," and go quiet, and you could tell the numbers didn't reach him at all. He wasn't carrying the people he'd saved. He was carrying something older. He was carrying Niamh Vale. I got the story in pieces over the weeks that followed, some from Bram, more from the woman in the gray hood, whose name, it turned out, was Niamh. Niamh Vale. Edrin's daughter. She'd been 6 years old when her father died, old enough to remember him, young enough to be told whatever the grown-ups decided to tell her, and to half believe it, the way you half believe anything when you're 6 and the world is too big to argue with. What they told her was that her father, Sergeant Vale, a King's Guard of 19 years' service, the steadiest man in the regiment, had died in an accident. A fall. A wet stare on a winter night off duty alone. Tragic. Nobody's fault. The kind of thing that just happens. They gave him a plate on the memorial wall and a folded flag and a service with the bagpipes, and they buried him, and that was that. Except Sergeant Vale hadn't fallen. Here's what I learned, and I'll tell it as plain as I can, because the plain version is bad enough without me dressing it up. Years before any of this, before I ever put on the uniform, there'd been a plot against the crown. Not a loud one. A quiet, patient, inside thing, money moving where it shouldn't. A few people in positions of trust selling pieces of the royal household security to men who meant the family harm. It went on for a long time before anybody noticed. The thing about a quiet rot is that it's quiet. Sergeant Vale noticed. He wasn't an investigator. He was a guard. But guards see things. They stand still in corners and the household forgets they're there, and they hear the half conversations and they watch who comes and goes by the staff gate at strange hours, and a man who's paid attention for 19 years feels it in his bones when the rhythm goes wrong. Edrin felt it, and Edrin, being the kind of man he was, didn't look away. He started keeping notes, quiet ones. Names, times, a small leather book he carried inside his tunic. He was careful. He was a careful man. But he made one mistake, and the mistake was that he trusted the wrong person with what he'd found, went to someone above him that he thought was clean, and that someone was not clean, and 3 weeks later Sergeant Vale went down a wet stair on a winter night, alone, off duty. And the little leather book was never found. They closed it as an accident. Of course they did. The people who'd had him killed were the same people who got to decide what his death was called. Bram knew. A few of the old guard knew or suspected, or felt it the way you feel a draft from a door that's supposed to be shut. But there was no book. There was no proof. There was a grieving widow and a 6-year-old girl and a folded flag, and there was the machine of the household that wanted, more than anything, for the whole thing to be quiet again. So they let it be quiet. That's the part Bram couldn't forgive. Not the men who killed Edrin. You expect rot to behave like rot. What ate at Bram for all those years was that the rest of them, the good ones, the loyal ones, him, they'd let it be quiet. They'd stood their posts and kept their faces still, and let the best of them go into the ground under a lie because the truth was inconvenient and dangerous, and there was no proof, and what good would it do now anyway? We told everyone it was an accident. 19 years he'd stood on that forecourt. Every day he'd walked past the turning to the memorial gardens. Every day he'd known the name on the wall was a lie wearing the truth's clothes. And he'd done nothing, because there was nothing to do, because the book was gone. Then one gray Tuesday in October, a young woman in a gray hood came and stood at the fence and looked up at the Queen's window. And Bram saw her like she was the only living thing on the whole square. Because he'd known. The second he really looked at her, some part of him had known. She had her father's stillness. She stood the way Edrin stood. And she was doing what Edrin had done, paying attention, watching the rhythm, working something out with a patience that scared the people it should have scared. Niamh had grown up and gotten quietly, carefully obsessed with the gap in the story of her father's death. The wet stare that didn't sit right. The book her mother said he always carried that nobody could find. She'd spent years on it, the way you spend years on a wound you won't let close. And somewhere in those years, she'd found something. She'd found one of them. One of the quiet men from the old plot, still alive, still moving in the shadows of the household. The man in the heavy coat. And she'd found that the rot wasn't finished. That it had only ever gone dormant the way rot does, waiting in the wood. The old plot against the crown had children too, and they'd grown up just like Niamh had, and they were patient just like their fathers had been. And they were planning something for Greymont Palace, something for Queen Saoirse, who sat in the East Wing morning room behind the third window on the second floor, and had no idea that the thing that killed a guard 19 years ago was coming back for her. Niamh hadn't come to the fence to hurt anyone. She'd come to warn them. She'd come with what she had: pages, copies, the threads she'd pulled together over years, in a small canvas bag across her chest, trying to work out how a nobody, the daughter of a man who died in disgrace as far as the public knew, could get a warning past the gate and into the right hands without being stopped, or laughed at, or quietly made to fall down a wet stair of her own. She'd been working out how to reach the Queen, and the man in the heavy coat had been working out how to reach her first. That's what they'd been doing, circling each other across that crowd. Not predator and victim. Two people who both knew the truth, one trying to deliver it and one trying to bury it again, for good this time, under a great deal of smoke. Bram told me one piece of it, late in the guardroom, weeks after, when the city had started to stitch itself back together and the news had moved on to other things. He told me about the moment behind the gatehouse, when he'd had Niamh pinned and shielded with the smoke rising and the man coming, and she'd grabbed his sleeve and said the thing in his ear that changed his face. I asked him what she'd said. He was quiet a long time, long even for him. She said, "My father had a book," Bram told me. "He wrote it all down. I found it. It's real." He turned his cup around on the table, slow, not drinking. 19 years, he said. 19 years I told myself there was nothing to be done because there was no proof, and his little girl carried the proof up to my own gate in a canvas bag, and I nearly didn't see her. I nearly looked through her like she was just another face in the wall. He stopped turning the cup. "That's the thing that'll stay with me, Tomas," he said. "Not the bomb, not the man, that I nearly looked through her." He didn't say anything else that night. He didn't have to. I understood, finally, what I'd been watching that first gray Tuesday, why he'd come off his stance after 19 years of standing through everything. It wasn't that he'd spotted a threat. He'd spotted a debt. He'd spotted the chance, the one chance to stop looking through the gap in the wall and reach into it instead. But I'm getting ahead of myself, telling you the meaning before I've told you the end. Because there's a piece I haven't given you yet, and it's the piece everything was actually moving toward, all those gray days. The one the title of this whole telling is about, the truth they'd buried for years, and how it finally came up into the light. It came up in a room I never expected to stand in front of a woman I never expected to meet. Niamh got her warning past the gate, in the end. She just didn't do it the way she'd planned. She did it covered in the dust of a bomb, with a guard's blood, Bram's. He'd torn his hand on the stones, drying on her sleeve, with the man who killed her father folded face down on the forecourt, and a half-typed trigger glowing on a cracked phone screen under my shaking hands. She did it because a steady man who'd stood still for 19 years finally, on one gray Tuesday, refused to look through her. And what happened when the truth reached the third window on the second floor of the East Wing? What Queen Saoirse of Valdoria did when a guard's orphaned daughter laid her dead father's little leather book on the table in front of her. That's the last part of this. That's where the burying ends. They don't take you into the palace through the front. I want to say that first, because in all the films it's the grand staircase and the big doors, and it isn't. It's a plain corridor off the staff wing, gray carpet, a smell of floor polish, a line of old portraits nobody looks at. That's how the real heart of a place like Greymont works. The grand parts are for showing. The real parts are quiet. I wasn't supposed to be there at all. Bram was. They'd asked for Bram, naturally, the man whose hand had stopped the thumb on the phone, and Niamh because she was the one with the book. But Bram in the corridor with his bandaged hand and his face still gray from 3 days of not sleeping had stopped a man in a good suit and said, "The boy comes too," meaning me. And nobody argued with Bram that week. That week Bram could have asked for the moon. So I came too. 23 years old, 4 months and a few days on the job, walking down a gray corridor toward a door I'd never in my life imagined standing behind. Niamh walked between us. She'd been given clean clothes, but she'd kept her own coat, and she had the canvas bag held against her chest with both arms, the way you'd hold a child. She was very pale and very quiet, and she kept her chin up. Her father's chin. I knew that now, having heard the whole of it. She walked like a guard's daughter. She walked like she was reporting for a duty she'd been waiting her whole life to perform. At the door, the man in the good suit stopped us. "Her Majesty will see Miss Vale," he said, "and the sergeant, the young man, waits here." And Niamh, quiet Niamh, pale Niamh, who'd barely said 10 words the whole walk, turned and looked at him and said, in a low, even voice that didn't shake at all, "My father stood his post for 19 years and they put him in the ground under a lie. If a guard who stood with me through a bomb wants to stand with me through this, he stands with me. All of us go in, or none of us do." There was a silence. The man in the good suit looked at her. He looked at Bram. He looked, last and least, at me. Then he opened the door. The morning room was smaller than I expected. That's the other thing the films get wrong. It was a normal-sized room, warm, a fire going against the October damp, a window, the third window, the east wing, the second floor with the gray light coming through it, and the square spread out below, the square where 3 days earlier the air had been shoved sideways and 1,000 people had folded down to the ground. And by the window stood Queen Saoirse of Valdoria. I'd seen her before, of course, from a distance, as a shape in a car, a wave on a balcony, a figure at the far end of a ceremony. Never like this. Never 6 feet away in a warm room with the firelight on her face. She was older than the photographs let on, and smaller, and her eyes were the kind that go right through the polite version of a person to the one underneath. She'd been told the broad shape of it already. You could see it in how she held herself. She'd had 3 days to be afraid, and she'd used them up, and now she was just steady. She looked at Niamh for a long moment. "You're Sergeant Vale's daughter," she said. It wasn't a question, but Niamh answered it anyway. "Yes, ma'am." "I remember your father," the Queen said. And something in Niamh's face, some last brace she'd been holding all those years, cracked right down the middle, because she hadn't expected that. She'd come ready for disbelief, for the polite machine, for the door closed gently in her face the way it had always been closed. She had not come ready to be told, plainly in a warm room, "I remember your father. He used to stand the inner post on the east stair," the Queen went on, looking not at Niamh now but at the fire, at something further back than the fire. "When my children were small, they were frightened of the dark in that part of the house, the old part, and they'd ask for the tall guard on the stair because he never moved, and a thing that never moves can't be hiding anything. Your father would stand there half the night so 2 small children could sleep. He thought no one noticed." She looked back at Niamh. "I noticed." Niamh's eyes had filled. She didn't wipe them, she let them be. "They told me he fell," the Queen said. Her voice had changed. It had gone very flat and very careful, the way Bram's went careful, and I understood that this was a powerful person holding something heavy with great control. "On a stair. A wet stair. It seemed a cruel thing for a man so sure-footed, but they told me he fell, and I was given no reason to think otherwise. And I am ashamed to say I did not ask." The room was very quiet. The fire ticked. "You have a reason to think otherwise," the Queen said, "don't you?" Niamh stepped forward. She put the canvas bag down on the table between them, a plain table, a few feet of polished wood, and she opened it, and she took out the thing she had carried for years and through a bomb and up a gray corridor. A small book, leather dark with handling cracked along the spine, the corners soft from a man's pocket, Sergeant Vale's book. She set it on the table. "He wrote it all down," Niamh said. "Names, dates, money, the men who were selling the household safety, who they were selling it to. He found it and he was careful, and he made one mistake and they killed him for it, and they took the book." Her voice held. It held the whole way. "It took me 11 years, ma'am, but I found it. They hid it. They didn't burn it, I think they were afraid to, I think they thought they might need it against each other one day. They hid it, and I found it, and it's all true. Every word. The Queen did not reach for the book, not at first. She looked at it the way you'd look at a grave. And the men in it, she said, are they? Some are dead, Niamh said. Some are old and some had children, and the children grew up the way I grew up on a story their fathers told them, only their story was different from mine, and they finished what their fathers started, the garden, the phone, the man your sergeant put on the ground. She drew a breath. It was never only about my father, ma'am. My father was just the first one who noticed. They've been waiting 19 years for the quiet to last long enough. They came back for the crown. They came back for you. And then the Queen of Valdoria reached out and picked up a dead guard's leather book and held it in both her hands, and bowed her head over it. And for a moment, just a moment, she was not a queen at all. She was an old woman who had let a quiet thing stay quiet because the truth was inconvenient and dangerous, and there had been no proof. And now the proof was in her hands, and it was too late to save the man, but not perhaps too late to do right by him. When she lifted her head, her eyes had gone hard and bright. It will not be quiet, she said, not this time. She looked at each of us in turn, Niamh, Bram, even me, the green boy by the door. You have my word, said Queen Saoirse. Every name in this book will be answered for, in the light, with his name said out loud and the truth of how he died said with it. Your father did not fall, Miss Vale. Your father was murdered standing his post, and Valdoria will know it. Niamh made a small sound, just one, the sound of a thing she'd held for 11 years finally being allowed to set down. And here is the part I think about most. Through all of it, Bram had stood by the door, hands behind his back, in the posture of a man on duty even though there was no duty left to do. He hadn't said a word. He'd let Niamh carry it because it was hers to carry. But now the Queen looked at him, and she crossed the room to him, this small, steady old woman, and she stood in front of him and she said, You knew, didn't you, Sergeant, all these years? Bram didn't lie to her. I'll always honor him for that. He could have. The easy thing, the safe thing would have been to say I suspected, ma'am, but there was no proof, and it would even have been true. Instead, Bram said, Yes, ma'am, I knew, and I did nothing. The room held its breath. Why? The Queen asked, not cruelly. She wanted to understand it. Because there was no book, Bram said, and without the book there was no proof. And without proof, a guard who says the wrong thing about the wrong men ends up at the bottom of his own wet stare. He paused. His voice didn't break, but it came from somewhere very deep. That's what I told myself, for 19 years. And it was true, ma'am, every word of it was true, and it was also a coward's reason, and I knew that too. I stood my post and I let his name stay a lie because it was safer. That's the whole of it. There's no better version. I have never in my life heard a man take the weight of a thing so completely onto himself, with so little flinching. The Queen looked at him for a long moment. You came off your post, she said, 3 days ago, after 19 years of standing it. You came off your mark and you crossed that square and you put your hand on a man's wrist and you held it there. Why, after all that time, did you finally move? And Bram said the truest thing I think he'd ever said. Because his daughter came to the gate, he said, and I was about to look through her, the way I'd looked through the whole thing for 19 years, and I caught myself doing it, and I thought, no, not her. I let him go into the ground. I will not look through his girl too. The Queen reached up and put her hand on the old guard's arm, over the bandage, very gently. Then you did not fail him, Sergeant, she said. You were late, but you did not fail him. There is a difference, and it is the whole of a man's life, and you should learn it before you're as old as I am. They were as good as the Queen's word, in the end. It wasn't quick. These things never are, but it wasn't quiet either, and that was the point. There was an inquiry, a real one, with Edrin Vale's name on the front of it. The men in the leather book who were still living were named in the light, the way she'd promised. The plot, the new one, the children's one, was pulled up by the root. Every thread of it followed back. The man in the heavy coat never sent his second message to anyone again. And one cold, bright morning the following spring, they changed the plate on the memorial wall in the Veldon Gardens, where the bomb had scarred the stone and the masons had repaired it. The old plate had just said his name and his years and King's Guard. The new one said his name and his years and King's Guard, and under it, 4 more words, set in the bronze where everyone walking past could read them. He noticed, he stood. Niamh chose the words. She told me later it was the only epitaph that fit. Her father had spent his whole life doing 2 things, noticing what others looked through and standing when others moved. It had cost him everything. And in the end it had saved the very crown the rot meant to take, just 19 years late, carried up to the gate by his daughter in a canvas bag. Bram stood the honor guard at the unveiling. His last duty near enough he put in his papers that summer. 19 years and then some, and he went out not with the easy, clean record he could have kept, but with the truth on it, the whole truth, the part where he knew and did nothing right there alongside the part where in the end he moved. He wanted it that way. A man's record should be the real one, he told me, or it's just another wet stare. I stayed on. I'm not green anymore. I've got my own years on the forecourt now, my own gray Tuesdays, my own wall of faces moving past. And I'll tell you what Bram taught me, the thing I carry out onto that stone every single morning. It isn't about bombs or plots or books in canvas bags. Those come once in a lifetime if they come at all. It's smaller than that. It's harder than that. It's this. 1,000 faces go past you in a day, and it's the easiest thing in the world to look through them, to watch the wall and never the people in it, to decide quietly that the thing that doesn't fit the rhythm is probably nothing, and the inconvenient truth is probably better left alone, and there's no proof anyway, and what good would it do? The whole of a man's life can hide in the difference between looking through someone and seeing them. Niamh Vale saw. It killed him. And then, 19 years too late, on one gray Tuesday in October, a tired old guard at the end of his service looked at a young woman in a hood, and instead of looking through her, the way he'd looked through everything for 19 years, he saw her. That's all it was. That's everything it was. He saw her, and the truth they'd buried finally came up into the light.